Uh, so we continue. It is now part 3 of The King. Let me know in the comments if you are enjoying this kind of story. Though I'm pretty sure I'm going to see it through to its end either way. But, comments are nice. The flashing of the light seemed to become more active as they continued to pursue the king after their realization of the wrongs that they have committed. They have decided to make their move to see if the king is still around and to undo, or at least attempt to undo, whatever it is that has befallen the kingdom. So as they do, and they make their way closer and closer to the castle, to where the king spends a good majority of his time. The castle seems to only be impeding the light, that there is something going on outside of it. But due to the press for time, as their age is being lost to them, and their bodies are becoming more and more decrepit as they approach the castle and the light, they begin to see themselves as dripping messes, their body oozing with sores, with wounds, with all kinds of material pouring out of them. So old that they can see the veins on top of their flesh, and their clothes being reduced to tatters, to the point where they're nearly wrinkled, old, and completely naked. They press into the castle, hoping to find the king inside of there, but with them barely even able to utter words amongst each other, as it feels like. My throat is too dry. My chest is too tight. They look for water, since their mouths are now mostly just used for inhaling air due to the lack of moisture as their insides begin to dry out. They stumble around for a good while, their bones creaking and popping, and in some of their cases falling and breaking their bones against the ground as they shuffle around and fall over themselves, let alone each other. They give up their futile attempt to search for the king inside the castle. Red hot anger would fuel them by now, but they're so weak, so frail, they couldn't bring themselves to utter a single curse, couldn't bring themselves to even get angry at anything that was taking place. They just felt tired, exhausted, pained, and miserable. So they decided to go outside the castle. to search the streets to find even just a stone that's been knocked over, maybe some cracked piece of street or building could lead them to where the king possibly was, searching for answers when they were so lost. Just dried up prunes that they were. Some of them even began to laugh at themselves, at the state in which they've become, at just how much they had truly lost in search of only being able to lose the king and lose the potential for them to be seen through. They laughed at their own folly, their own foolishness. They began to laugh, gyrate so much that their bodies began to feel like rubber. No insides, no anything. Just very bouncy rubber. As their flesh rippled and their own voices began to come back in laughter. Some of their youth returned as they opened their eyes and realized that they haven't laughed in a long time. That their own anger, bitterness had really robbed them of their ability to enjoy themselves and their lives and what they had. It hasn't yet dawned on them exactly what was going on. But they began to understand something, acknowledge something. Yes, truly the situation that they were in would terrify, mystify, and downright break people, but for them, it humanized them because they lost their humanity when they began to search for reasons to hate another person, to fear another person, to avoid another person. So this is what has become of us. One of them spoke. The others just smiled, a bit of sadness in their eyes. We had done so much to ruin what we had. Truly we have. We took everything, absolutely everything for granted. And as a moment of silence falls between them, the flash of light doesn't become a flash anymore. Just a steady beam of light pouring through the streets, pouring through the walls of the buildings, pouring into them. So they could take a real breath of air, truly breathe for the first time in a long time. And their warmth returns from within, no longer aches or pains or feeling of tightness, just realization and a fondness for themselves, for each other, for life that they'd all but forgotten about until they were on the brink of losing it all. No longer dry, empty vessels, but filled to the brim with something new, but something familiar. They roused themselves, and with the brightness of the light, they realized that it finally dimmed, and they were all laying outside, just outside the castle, just outside the walls of the town, laying in a meadow. The sky stretched on forever, and all the light had receded back into the stars. Back into the vast darkness above them. But that heat never left, that light never left them. I had no idea what became of them, or even how they managed to get into the meadow from outside that cave, from that underground dwelling, or even what happened to that thing that terrified them so. For a moment, they were at rest, and they were at peace. There was nothing. Nothing that they wanted. Nothing that they needed. Nothing that drove them to do anything that they didn't want to do. So they just smiled, each one of them content, some of them giggling, others chuckling, as they roused themselves finally from the ground and move into an upright position. All of it felt so good. No darkness anywhere. Let's go see the king, one of them finally said. The others looked at him, nodded in agreement, smiled, helped each other up to their feet, to where they made their way into the castle before the king, who was about to lay down to get rest because he had moved into his night dressings as he sat upon his throne. He looked at these members of the court, smiling. So, you move before me now. I take it you've met our friend. A little puzzled, but they figured it out, chuckled lightly to themselves. Yeah. Very strange, very dark, very dangerous fellow. As he still is, as he always was. A little bit of question across the youngest member's brow. What exactly is our friend? Old. The king said so plainly, with a laugh. He is very, very old. Could say an embodiment of our time spent bastardizing ourselves. The others nod in agreement. So, what do we do now? One of the ladies asks. Whatever you like. There was never anything I could tell you as your king from the beginning. I saw how you all moved about the court, how you would just dart out of sight. But that's just how it is, though. I used to be filled with anger, bitterness. I hated the lot, no matter who it was. They always seemed to be missing some big picture, something that they could do that I could not, and that they would always do it eventually, not at the time that I desired. So I got bitter, resentful, because they had all this opportunity and all they did was squander it. Hated every last one of them. Hated every person I could lay my eyes on. Hated anything bigger than myself. But when I met my friend, nothing was bigger. Because I already created something within myself that was big and ugly, grotesque even. Though I did it because it was reasonable to me, even when it was unreasonable for anyone else. My anger, my hatred was my own, as my old friend had so graciously reminded me that I was wasting my potential. It had nothing to do with them. It's about me. And I hated myself. And I tortured myself by hating someone else. I was hating myself. Because they're not going to feel it. Hell, I'd never even spoke to anybody if I did not like them. And even when I did speak to people I didn't like, I was never honest with them. What was the point of seeing other people's potential if I'm not honest? But I saw your potential. And it's about time that you members of this court were honest. They shared a few more words. And they were very honest with each other throughout the entire time. There was never a time in which these members of the court ever felt like whatever was said, however they were seen by the king, was unfair or unjust. They earned every compliment just as much as they earned every criticism. And it wasn't despite themselves. It was to grow in themselves. If anything, that night left them with a desire to better themselves. Not because they hate somebody or that they had a grudge towards anybody. They wanted to grow because they wanted to. It was the kick that they needed to grow. It was the one that they wanted so badly but were so afraid to get from the king. So they spoke amongst each other. They split up for the night. They always held this story in high regard. Anytime anybody would meet with them, anytime anybody would talk with them, they would always remark about their old friend. Though they spent a good deal laughing, drinking, actually having a good time in the court, They did everything in their power to be better than they were before. And they would always remind themselves and those around them that it took them seeing the worst of themselves in an unbridled amount of truth to get there. They knew pain. They knew horror. They knew death as they knocked on that door and damn near were it or lost forever. Yet they get to choose now exactly how they get to live. And they lived it with uproarious laughter, with joy unbridled, with love unhindered. They passed this story down, and even every now and again they would gather around the point of where they met their old friend. I would actually see the king there every now and again to thank the old friend for reminding him that to seek such things of others, to seek their undoing, is to seek your own undoing. The kingdom flourished, prospered, and under their new perception of life, they were able to rise to the occasions that met them in that mystical kingdom. And perhaps we'll come back to them one day. Though may the story that they had to tell come to you in full. No parts left out, no lack of any joy in your lives after hearing this story, but an abundance. Because what is it? What is life if you're sorrowful, bitter, hurt? If you can't enjoy any of it? If all it is one big string of happy accidents and miserable, depressing lows. Life can be short. Life could be hell. But then there is the in-between, where all of those things are simply choices. Sometimes it takes an old friend to remind us of that. And that was the king in its entirety, as far as I can tell. And as parting words of their story, because it wasn't only about the king. The queens and kings of that story, it's all about rising out of your own expectations, out of your own make in your life, to realize something greater. Because everybody has the potential. It just depends on whether you're gonna take it or you're gonna cry about it. It's both fair and unfair, but both sides are true. So that leaves that story, and there'll be more to come. Take care. Have a good day.